continue to support all efforts aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace, grounded in the principles of international law, respect for human rights, and accountability. We also see this in its full severity in the Middle East, in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip. We cannot remain silent or look away from the devastation, the bombings, including of hospitals, schools, and places of refuge. In light of the countless civilian deaths, famine, starvation, the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. To what end? These are abhorrent acts that stand in stark contrast to everything that this forum represents. They offend human conscience and shame the entire international community. Spain is a nation deeply proud of its Sephardic roots. When we speak to the people of Israel, we speak to a people of brothers and sisters, a people who, when they return to Spain, to Córdoba, Toledo, Seville, Barcelona, and so many other places, come home. This was the spirit behind the 2015 law, which was passed with broad consensus, granting Spanish nationality to descendants of Sephardic Jews originally from Spain. It is for this reason, and it is so difficult for us to understand, that we are so pained by the actions of the Israeli government in Gaza. We therefore cry out, we implore, we demand, stop this massacre now. No more deaths in the name of a people that is so wise and ancient, who have suffered so greatly throughout history. Let us be clear. We unequivocally condemn the heinous terrorism of Hamas, especially the brutal massacre of the 7th of October 2023 against the Israeli population. And we recognize Israel's right to self-defense. But with equal strength, we demand that the Israeli government fully uphold international humanitarian law throughout Gaza and the West Bank. We demand that humanitarian aid be delivered without delay, that a ceasefire be established with guarantees, and that all hostages still held by Hamas be released immediately. The international community must shoulder its responsibility to achieve as soon as possible a viable solution that would include the existence of two states. The recognition of the state of Palestine by an increasing number of member states of this organization, to which Spain added its voice this past May, must contribute to achieving a just and definitive regional peace based on the implementation of the United Nations resolutions and on the universal recognition of the State of Israel. President, delegates, as we know, many conflicts are both caused by and result in resource scarcity, state fragility, and inequality. The gap between current realities and the fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda remains vast, and the current funding shortfall for sustainable development exceeds $4 trillion per year. The call for efficiency and resource optimization made at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that we held recently in Seville must be sustained. Accordingly, Spain, in line with the consensus-based commitment adopted there, has launched the Seville Plan for Support to Multilateralism. We have increased our contributions to international development funds, and we have reaffirmed our commitment to defending human rights, gender equality, and the environmental transition, which are central and distinctive elements of our foreign policy. Allow me to briefly address each of these three areas. First, human rights. Spain is, as of this year, a member of the Human Rights Council, enabling us to continue advancing causes such as the fight against racism, the abolition of the death penalty, and the promotion of economic, social, and cultural rights, while at the same time persisting in the struggle against all forms of discrimination. Because we support plural, open societies in which all citizens participate, and we are concerned by the erosion of democracies, the growing disaffection towards values that are essential to democratic coexistence. In these confusing times, which are testing our capacity for dialogue, we must remain steadfast in our commitment to these values. In harmony with these principles, we believe that immigration, when properly managed, is a vector of mutual development for countries of origin, transit, and host countries. We believe that the human rights of migrants must therefore be the principal reference for our actions. Therefore, we fully support the implementation of the Global Compact on Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees. Secondly, I wish to refer to gender equality. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. It is therefore a fresh opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to real and effective equality. This is not merely a step forward in human rights, but above all, a matter of justice. Spain aspires to remain a global beacon in areas such as sexual and reproductive rights, the fight against sexual and gender-based violence, and the increased participation of women in leadership roles and in decision-making processes. Third, the environment. The triple planetary crisis that we are facing, climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, demands strengthened governance and sufficient resources to accelerate a just energy transition. This must enable us to triple renewable energy capacity, double energy efficiency, and to continue decarbonizing our economies. These are goals that are as ambitious as they are essential, and doubt must be completely excluded from the equation here. Spain calls for consensus and ambition ahead of COP30, which will be held in Brazil this November. There are other just as important challenges, including managing the impact of the transformative revolution known as artificial intelligence, which can accelerate progress on the 2030 agenda if we know how to direct it towards a fair and equitable digital transformation. And in health, the global dimensions of which were tragically evident during the recent COVID pandemic, we welcome here the consensus reached on the pandemic agreement. This strengthens the central role of the World Health Organization within the global health architecture. Madam President, Spain's foreign policy is built around three fundamental axes based on geography, history, and conviction. These are towards Africa and Mediterranean, towards the Americas and the Atlantic, and towards Europe. I would like to share some thoughts on these three areas. Spain is well aware that Africa represents a strategic global interest of the highest order. The present is marked in certain countries by structural deficiencies and some brutal conflicts and wars that receive insufficient attention when compared with others that I've already referred to. Here I'm referring to numerous peacekeeping operations in the region to which Spain contributes decisively. This is the case in Western Sahara, where Spain will continue to support the Secretary General's personal envoy in seeking a solution that is acceptable and consistent with UN norms and frameworks. Africa's future will be shaped by a young, dynamic, and proactive population that is increasingly engaged in global affairs. That's the future that we must support. Spain has therefore adopted the Spain-Africa Strategy 2025 to 2028. We want to develop a partnership based on concrete action and shared interests, and to promote vibrant African multilateralism embodied by the African Union and other sub-regional organizations. Strictly bilaterally speaking, I must mention the special relationship of neighborliness and cooperation that binds us to the Kingdom of Morocco, which in recent years has been revitalized to the benefit of our peoples. Latin America and the Caribbean represent for Spain a community of kindred nations, an irreplaceable part of our identity, strengthened by shared heritage, that is the Spanish language, spoken by 600 million people around the world. Spain holds the pro tempore secretariat of the Ibero-American Community of Nations until the end of 2026, and Madrid will hold the next Ibero-American Summit. We will continue to support the EU's engagement in the region, which will culminate this year in the EU CELAC summit that will be held in Colombia next month, November. The European Union is one of the greatest achievements of concord and a model for multilateralism. Its voice is more necessary than ever in these times. We therefore advocate for a union that is increasingly effective, cohesive, secure, and competitive on the global economy. I think it's important to recall that on the 11th of June this year, we launched a definitive political agreement regarding the key aspects of the future accord between the European Union and the United Kingdom. This was a historic agreement that respects Spain's position on sovereignty and jurisdiction over Gibraltar, which will bring confidence, legal certainty, and stability to the lives of the populations of the Campo de Gibraltar and Gibraltar itself. Madam President, I began speaking about the past and present of the United Nations, and I shall dedicate my last few words to its future. In these times of severe budgetary constraints, I call on all member states to reaffirm their commitment to this organization. I encourage all of its personnel, led by the Secretary General, to persist in their enormous efforts towards efficiency and effectiveness, prioritizing those areas whose neglect would represent an unacceptable breach of the ethical standards that must always guide their work. We continue to believe in the need to advance reform initiatives, and we offer our capacity for dialogue and consensus building, as well as our firm multilateral conviction in this endeavor. On this 80th anniversary, which coincides with the 70th anniversary of Spain's accession to the organization, I wish, Madam President, to renew my country's recognition of all of the men and women working within the United Nations. You are the custodians of the memory of the 20th century, and the guardians of the hopes invested in the 21st. And it is now, when so many questions are surrounding multilateralism and cooperation, that we need you most. Thank you very much.
On behalf
of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the King of Spain.
L'Assemblée va entendre l'allocution de son Excellence,
now hear an address by His Excellency Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine.
Je prie le protocole de bien vouloir
I
accompagner
request
son Excellence
protocol
que
to
j'invite
escort
à
His
prendre la
Excellency
parole
and invite
devant
him
l'Assemblée.
to address the Assembly.
Madam Chair, Deputy Secretary. Dear leaders, dear friends, and all those who can become our friends, because you want safety and peace just as much as we do. Today, no one but ourselves can guarantee security. Only strong alliances, only strong partners, and only our own weapons. The 21st century isn't much different from the past. If a nation wants peace, it still has to work on weapons. It's sick, but that's the reality. Not international law, not cooperation. Weapons decide who survives. Excellencies, you know perfectly well international law doesn't work fully unless you have powerful friends who are truly willing to stand up for it. And even that doesn't work without weapons. It's terrible, but without it, things would be even worse. There are no security guarantees except friends and weapons. No Ukrainian choice this kind of reality. And knowing our people, they would have chosen a different priority. Ukrainians are peaceful people, but they are people who want to live freely in their own independent country. That's why we invest in defense. For many nations, there is simply no other way left. Nations can speak about their pain from stages like this, but even during bloodshed, there isn't a single international institution that can truly stop it. That's how weak these institutions have become. What can Sudan or Somalia or Palestine or any other people living through war really expect from the UN or the global system? For decades, just statements and statements. And even everything happening in Gaza remains without a way out. Even now, Syria, after all the changes, still has to appeal to the world to ease the sanctions that are choking its economy. It has to ask and wait. Syria deserves stronger support from the international community. And as Russia's war against my country goes on, people are still dying every week. Yet there is no ceasefire because Russia refuses. Russia abducted thousands of Ukrainian children, and we have brought some of them back. And I thank everyone who's helped. But how long will it take to bring all of them home? Childhood slips away faster than adults are able to help. Look at Israel. Nearly 2 years have passed and hostages still haven't been freed. They must be freed, but even that still hasn't happened. And for years, there have been no real answers to other threats, either chemical weapons and famine used as a weapon. Last year, at this assembly, I warned the world about the risk of radiation disasters, especially due to Russia's occupations of our Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, but nothing's changed. Nothing's. And yesterday, the plant went into blackout again, and Russia hasn't stopped shelling even in areas near a nuclear facility. And because of international institutions are too weak, this madness continues. Even being part of a long-standing military alliance doesn't automatically mean you are safe. Just recently, 19 simple Russian drones violated Polish airspace, and only 4 were shut down. Luckily, they were not shaheeds or even worse. Otherwise, the results would have been horrific. Estonia had to call a UN Security Council meeting for the first time in history because Russian fighter jets deliberately entered its airspace. Moldova is defending itself again from Russia's interference. We are helping Moldova, and Russia's trying to do to Moldova what Iran once did to Lebanon. And the global response, again, not enough. We have already lost Georgia in Europe. Human rights and the European nature of the state system are only shrinking there. Georgia is dependent on Russia. And for many, many years, Belarus has also been moving toward dependence on Russia. Europe cannot afford to lose Moldova too. It's important to remember how the world once ignored the need to help Georgia after Russia's attack, and how the moment was missed with Belarus. How Moldova must not be lost. And for Europe, supporting Moldova's stability is not costly, but failing to do so would come at a much higher price. That's why the EU needs to help Moldova now with funding and energy support, not just words or political gestures. We must not forget about protecting the rights of people and the rights of nations in regions where these rights are under threat. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights must apply everywhere. But the Taliban in Afghanistan dragged a whole country back into the dark ages. Cartels in some Latin America countries are more powerful than the government there. This is all about collapse of international law and the weakness of the international institutions. And so it's about the rise of weapons. Weapons decide who survives. Excellencies, yesterday President Trump stood right here in this hall, and God saved him from a murder attempt during the campaign. A shot was fired from a rifle, and just a fraction of an inch saved his life. Just days ago, President, along with hundreds of thousands of Americans, honored the memory of Charlie Kirk. Sadly, his life was cut short by a bullet. Once again, violence with a rifle in hand. We also mourn the Ukrainian woman, Irina Zarutska. She was brutally killed with a knife here in America, the very country where she was seeking refuge from Russia's war. And almost every day, when we open the news, we see headlines about violent attacks happening all around the world. Most of it is done with weapons. People are already used to, but weapons are evolving faster than our ability to defend ourselves. Now, there are tens of thousands of people who know how to professionally kill using drones. Stopping that kind of attack is harder than stopping any gun, knife, or bomb. This is what Russia has brought with its war. It used to be that only the strongest countries could use drones because they were expensive and complex. Now, even simple drones can fly thousands of kilometers. War tech doesn't care about geography anymore. It's now reshaping it. Just recently, airports in Europe had to shut down because of drones. Authorities couldn't even say what kind of drones they were, who sent them, or from where. Last week, North Korea announced the test of a tactical strike drone. That means even countries with limited resources can now build weapons that are dangerous to their neighbors. Ukraine and nations like Saudi Arabia know all too well how dangerous Iranian attack drones are. But what happens when all the types of drones become available, even to small terrorist groups or cartels? The world moves too slowly to protect itself, and weapons move fast. Now companies are already working on drones that can shoot down other drones, and it's only a matter of time, not much, before drones are fighting drones, attacking critical infrastructure, and targeting people all by themselves, fully autonomous and no human involved, except the few who control AI systems. Dear leaders, we are now living through the most destructive arms race in human history, because this time includes artificial intelligence. And if there are no real security guarantees except friends and weapons, And if the world can't respond even to old threats, and if there is no strong platform for international security, will there be any place left on Earth that's still safe for people? We need global rules now for how AI can be used in weapons, and this is just as urgent as preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. We need to restore international cooperation, real working cooperation for peace and for security. A few years from now might already be too late. 10 years ago, war looked different, and no one imagined that cheap drones could create dead zones, areas stretching for dozens of kilometers where nothing moves, no vehicles, no life. People used to imagine that only after a nuclear strike. Now it's drone reality. Mass-produced, simple drones, and without AI yet. Ukraine doesn't have the big fat missiles dictators love to show off in parades, but we do have drones that can fly up to 2,000-3,000 kilometers. We had no choice but to build them to protect our right to life. Control over the sea used to depend on having a big navy. Ukraine doesn't have a big fleet, but we succeeded. In the Black Sea, we pushed what's left of the Russian navy into remote base. And we did it with sea drones. That's how we protect our ports and maritime trade routes, because Russia has left us no other choice. And our spiderweb operation, when cheap drones destroyed or damaged dozens of expensive Russian strategic bombers, became a real example for special forces around the world of what new weapons can do to old systems. These very Russian bombers attacked our cities. And none of this would have happened if Putin had not started this full-scale aggression, full-scale war. And every year that this war goes on, weapons become even more deadly. And only Russia deserves to be blamed for this. Dear leaders, to protect lives, Ukraine builds underground schools and underground hospitals. To protect lives, we have to spend more on protecting power stations from drone and missile attacks than on building sports facilities or cultural infrastructure. Ukrainian farmers are learning how to protect their equipment from Russia's FPV drone strikes, and for them, that challenge is far greater than climate change. Russia's war has put us in this situation, but do you have protection against similar threats? The facts are simple. Stopping this war now, and with it, the global arms race, is cheaper than building underground kindergartens or massive bunkers for critical infrastructure later. Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones. Stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the first to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear warhead. So we must use everything we have together to force the aggressor to stop. And only then do we have a real chance that this arms race will not end in catastrophe for all of us. If it takes weapons to do it, if it takes pressure on Russia, then it must be done. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider and deeper. And we told you before, Ukraine is only the first, and now Russian drones are already flying across Europe, and Russian operations are already spreading across countries, and Putin wants to continue this war by expanding it, and no one can feel safe right now. So first, we are now building a new security architecture for ourselves. More than 30 countries are already part of our coalition, and we are strengthening army, launching joint weapons production with partners, and defining financial commitments for defense in a way that could become a security model for any other nation. If security guarantees work for Ukraine, something more than just friends and weapons. It will mean that people were able to make national security not a privilege for a few nations, but a right for everyone. Second, we are ready to make our modern weapons become your modern security, your modern weapon. And we have decided to open up arms exports. And these are powerful systems tested in a real war when every international institution failed. And we are also ready to grow our defense production together with strong partners so that their protection is modern and reliable. You don't need to start this race from scratch. We're ready to share what has already proven itself in real defense. And third, many in the world are still relaxed, still. But look at how many countries are here at this General Assembly, countries that are at war or just came out of war or are trying to stop one or openly getting ready for one. War has already reached too many people to pretend it has nothing to do with you. So it depends on you. Whether you help peace or continue trading with Russia and helping Russia to fund this war, it depends on you. Whether prisoners of war will be freed, whether abducted children will come home, whether hostages will be free. It depends on you. What will define existence? War like now, or our joint strong actions as it should be? Yesterday we had a good meeting with President Trump, and I also spoke with many other strong leaders, and together we can change a lot. Of course, we are doing everything to make sure Europe truly helps. And of course, we count on the United States. I appreciate the support we are receiving. Yes, much depends on the G7 and G20, but in the end, peace depends on all of us, on the United Nations. So don't stay silent while Russia keeps dragging this war on. Please speak out and condemn it. Please join us in defending life and international law and order. People are waiting for action. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens à remercier le président de l'Ukraine. L'Assemblée va entendre l'allocution de son Altesse Sérénissime, le prince Albert II,
Sovereign Prince of Monaco.
Je prie de bien vouloir accompagner, je prie le protocole de bien vouloir accompagner son Altesse Sérénissime, que j'invite à prendre la parole devant l'Assemblée.
Madam President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 80 years ago, the creation of the United Nations marked a decisive turning point in contemporary history in international relations, offering each state a forum for dialogue and exchange. The ambition of the founders was clear and bold. All nations, large and small, need to be able to participate on equal footing in crafting collective solutions, equality, respect, dialogue. This is the heart of the multilateral spirit and underpinning of the values where Monaco found its place within the concert of nations. Over these past 8 decades, the United Nations has supported and ushered in major turning points: the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, the process of decolonization, the hope of an international order that is more peaceful after the Cold War. The organization contributed to the establishment of robust international law, the adoption of numerous treaties, law of the sea, counter-terrorism treaties, protection of the environment, the promotion of human rights. Monaco ratified more than 270 of these treaties, which, beyond their symbolic dimension, govern the day-to-day lives of our population. The UN also played a key role in the maintenance of international peace and security. On all continents, these operations help to prevent conflict and to support democratic transitions. International justice, specifically through the judgments rendered by the International Criminal Tribunals, have been significant sources of progress in combating impunity for the gravest crimes, and the International Court of Justice remains a pillar when it comes to peaceful resolution of disputes. The United Nations has been a pioneer in ecological awareness, raising the protection of our planet, mobilizing governments, scientists, civil society to put together concerted strategies. And these are issues which are of tremendous importance to us. The UN has shed light on the role of sports as a vector for peace, for inclusion, for development. Our principally welcomes the fact that sport is increasingly taking pride of place in the work of the organization. Madam President, we are cognizant of the progress that has been made over the past 8 decades, and yet we have more challenges to surmount, which requires resolute collective action. The progress that we have made is significant, but we have a grim reality. We are in a multipolar world where international realities are significant. There are proliferation of peacekeeping operations show that dialogue and preventive diplomacy, unfortunately, do not always generate the anticipated results. International security is today gravely imperiled. International tensions and conflicts are spreading in all 4 corners of the world, and this makes it all the more necessary for there to be a reaffirmation of the core principles of the United Nations: sovereignty of states, peaceful dispute resolution, respect for international law, and human rights. In this regard, the Principality of Monaco firmly condemns the war of aggression targeting Ukraine and the suffering this has inflicted upon civilian populations. And I reiterated this message just now to President Zelenskyy. I cherish the hope that a just and lasting negotiated peace agreement can be found soon to guarantee security and to rise to the expectations of the Ukrainian people. In the Middle East, violence has generated unacceptable human suffering, casualties. The risk of regional conflagration requires that there be an immediate de-escalation, protection of civilians, the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance, and a sincere relaunch of the peace process on the basis of the 2 states. Peace is not a utopia. Peace is an overriding necessity. These security-related challenges are compounded by environmental challenges. The international community recently met in Nice for the 3rd UN Conference on Oceans, vehemently recalling the need to act for the protection of seas and oceans. The Principality organized, before the conference, a Blue Economy and Finance Forum. Heads of state, economic leaders, investors, philanthropists, development banks, NGOs, 1,800 participants arrived from nearly 100 countries, responding to the call to mobilize more financial resources to invest in a sustainable, regenerative blue economy. And yet, the commitments made notwithstanding, there are still challenges. BB&J was adopted in January last, and this should lead us to implement immediately measures for the conservation and sustainable use of the diversity in the high seas. The fight against climate change is a responsibility, a historic responsibility. Acceleration of extreme events requires credible, immediate, financed responses. We are traversing significant difficulties. There is science which is accessible, abundant, more reliable than ever before. The Paris Agreement, the 10th anniversary of which we are marking this year, provides a structured, transparent framework which should generate robust trust among all stakeholders. This year, new nationally determined contributions have been published. And this is a reflection of the need to be more and more ambitious. I wish to recall that these ambitions carry moral significance, particularly vis-a-vis young people and succeeding generations, but also, as was recently recalled by the ICJ in the advisory opinion. And in this regard, and in accordance with the new
collective goal for financing, which is adopted in Baku last year, I decided that my country will double specific financing under climate agreements, and this is by 2028. Let us not forget that there's a need to invest in countering climate change, but there's a need to take into account the depletion of biodiversity throughout the world. COP17 and the Biological Diversity Convention, October 2026, will be held in Yerevan. This is a key opportunity to transform the commitments into reality, specifically when it comes to financing and the meaningful protection of ecosystems. Madam President, we cannot pass over in silence the alarming setbacks in human rights. Freedom, the repression of freedom, civil society, excessive use of force, these are all undermining the very basis of civilizations and are resulting in a loss of trust of citizens vis-a-vis systems. Women's rights are a key pillar for peace, for development, and for justice. 30 years after the Beijing conference, gender equality between men and women has still not been fully universally attained, and this remains a key priority, which is something we need to reaffirm. There's an urgent need to generate a collective commitment to combat violence against women and girls and against all kinds of persecution which they endure, including in conflict-affected areas. No society can be prosperous if such inequality persists there. Likewise, no society can develop without taking care of its young population, because young people are not just the future of the world. Young people are the present. 30 years after the World Youth Program, it is incumbent upon us to raise the role of young people in discussions on the economy, civic life, access to education, employment, digital issues. This is not a privilege, this is a right. Madam President, public global health is key. Non-communicable diseases are the main cause of premature deaths, and there's a need for cross-sectoral mobilization to address this challenge. I welcome the key role of the WHO with the global action against these diseases, but there's a need to move further to strengthen synergies among the stakeholders to improve the effectiveness of action, particularly among budgetary constraints. The fourth high-level meeting on this issue should generate new momentum to intensify prevention and to provide universal access to high-quality care. Madam President, the 80th anniversary of the United Nations offers an opportunity to breathe new life into multilateralism, to reform its operations, and to address the liquidity crisis. Reform of the United Nations should restore people's trust and to establish an effective structure and based on core values. The United Nations is the only universal body which is capable of defending sovereignty of states and embodies the ideal of cooperation amongst people. But this is not only at the UN headquarters of specialized institutions, UNESCO, FAO, and IAEA, and many others. These all play a critical role by providing concrete support for environmental, educational, and social policies of states, helping them to fully meet their responsibility without duplication of mandates in New York. And let us recenter the work of our organization to focus on the priorities enshrined in the Charter. We need to rekindle a spirit of dialogue and the spirit of organization. The general debate should once again become this unique opportunity where leaders of the world listen to one another and seek to achieve mutual understanding. The Principality of Monaco cherishes the hope that through reform, the UN will once again become the center with the harmonization of UN efforts for the maintenance of peace and security in accordance with Article 1 of our Charter. No state alone can resolve the crisis plaguing our times. It's by sharing ideas, resources, and willingness that we can together build a future of peace, of lasting peace, because together we are better. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to
Thank the Sovereign Prince of Monaco.
The
Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Masoud Pezeshkian, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Mr. Secretary General, Madam President, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year, and I quote, "Better together, 80 years and more of peace, development, and human rights," unquote, is in truth a summons to solidarity and to a shared vision of a brighter future. Our religious conviction, as well as the call of the prophets, rests upon the equality of the rights of all human beings. That which renders man more worthy is piety, namely truthfulness, wisdom, purity, and benevolence. The bedrock of all divine religions and of the human conscience is this golden maxim: that which you would not approve for yourself, do not approve for others. Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, once said, "Act towards others as you would have them act towards you." The Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, said, "None of you is a true believer unless he desires for others what he desires for himself." The sage Hillel, the elder, expressed the essence of the Torah as such: that which is hateful unto thee, do not do unto thy fellow. In the traditions of the Orient, likewise, the central teaching is this very principle, and secular schools of ethics, grounded in reason and conscience, have arrived at the same conclusion. Excellencies, is this the state of our world? Let us behold the past 2 years. The world in these 2 years was witness to genocide in Gaza, was witness to the destruction of homes and repeated violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity in Lebanon, was witness to the devastation of Syria's infrastructure, was witness to assault against the people of Yemen, was witness to the forced starvation of emaciated children in the arms of their mothers, was witness to the assassination of Iran's scientists, was witness to the surreptitious raids infringing upon the sovereignty of nations, violating the territorial integrity of states, and openly targeting leaders of people. And all of this under the full support of the most heavily armed regime in the face of the earth, and under the pretext of self-defense. Would you countenance such things for yourselves? Who is the disturber of the stability of the region and the world? Who is the actual threat against international peace and security? Who is the violator of the golden moral maxim of mankind? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, you all bore witness that this past June, my country was subjected to a savage aggression in flagrant contravention of the most elementary principles of international law. The aerial assaults of the Zionist regime and the United States of America against Iran's cities, homes, and infrastructures, precisely at a time when we were treading the path of diplomatic negotiations, constituted a grave betrayal of diplomacy and a subversion of efforts towards the establishment of stability and peace. This brazen act of aggression, in addition to martyring a number of commanders, citizens, children, women, scientists, and intellectual elites of my country, inflicted a grievous blow upon international trust and the very prospect of peace in the region. Should we fail to confront such perilous breaches of international norms, these aberrations shall spread to engulf the world. The assault upon nuclear facilities under safeguards and international supervision, the open attempt to assassinate leaders and duly constituted officials of UN member states, the systematic targeting of journalists and members of the press, and the killing of human beings who solely by the reason of their knowledge and expertise are converted into military targets. Again, would you countenance such acts for yourselves? With this behavior, they have killed at the very least over 35,000 innocent civilians in Gaza. They have deprived them of food, drinking water, medication, and proper health care. Those who have perpetrated such crimes
حمله به تأسیسات هستی تحت پادمان و نظارت بین المللی، تلاش علنی برای کشتن رهبران و مقامات رسمی دولت‌های عضو سازمان ملل، هدف گرفتن
systematic targeting of journalists and members of the press, and the killing of human beings who solely by the reason of their knowledge and expertise are converted into military targets. Again, would you countenance such acts for yourselves? Those who have perpetrated such crimes must know that Iran, the most ancient continuous civilization upon the face of the earth, has ever stood steadfast against the tempests of history. This nation, with a magnanimous spirit and an eternal will, has time and again demonstrated that it shall never bow before aggressors. And today as well, in the face of the transgressors, it stands upright with reliance upon the power of faith and its national cohesion. In this 12-day defense, the patriotic and valiant people of Iran laid bare before the aggressors the fallacy and self-delusion of their arrogant calculations. The enemies of Iran unwittingly fortified the sacred national unity. The people of Iran, despite the most severe, protracted, and crushing economic sanctions, psychological and media warfare, and persistent efforts to sow discord, at the very instant the first bullet was fired upon their soil, rose in unison in support of their valiant armed forces, and today they continue to honor the blood of their martyrs. Here, in the name of all Iranian people, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all personalities, nations, governments, and international and regional organizations that stood in solidarity with Iran during this war. Ladies and gentlemen, today, after nearly 2 years of genocide, mass starvation, the perpetuation of apartheid within the occupied territories, and aggression against its neighbors, the ludicrous and delusional scheme of a greater Israel is being proclaimed with brazenness by the highest echelons of that regime. The scheme encompasses vast swaths of the region. The map itself lays bare the true intentions of the Zionist regime, intentions that have, of late, been openly endorsed by its criminal prime minister. None in the world is secure from the aggressive machinations of this regime. It is manifest that the Zionist regime and its sponsors no longer even content themselves with normalization through political means. Rather, they impose their presence through naked force and have styled it peace through strength. Yet, this is neither peace nor power. It is nothing but aggression rooted in coercion and bullying. But we envision our powerful Iran alongside powerful neighbors within a strong region with a radiant future. A future in which we stand together against the grand project that imposes genocide, destruction, and instability upon the region. A future in which collective security is assured through genuine mechanisms of defensive cooperation and joint response to threats. A future in which human dignity and cultural diversity are cherished as foundational values. A future in which collective development is realized through joint investment in infrastructure and modern sciences. A future in which energy security and the equitable use of vital resources from the pillars of economic stability. A future in which the environment is safeguarded for posterity. A future in which national sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states are regarded as non-negotiable principles. A future not in pursuit of peace imposed by force, but founded upon strength derived through peace. In such a strong region, slaughter and bloodshed shall find no place. It is for this very reason that my country has, for many years, been among the staunchest advocates of establishing a region free of weapons of mass destruction. Yet those who themselves possess the largest nuclear arsenals and who in flagrant breach of the NPT make their weapons even deadlier and more destructive have for years subjected our people to pressures on the basis of spurious allegations. Last week, 3 European states, having failed through a decade of bad faith and thereafter by supporting military aggression to bring the proud people of Iran to their knees, at the behest of the United States of America, sought by means of pressure, coercion, imposition, and manifest abuse to reinstate against Iran the Security Council resolutions that had already been terminated. In doing so, they set aside good faith. They circumvented legal obligations. They sought to portray Iran's lawful remedial measures taken in response to the United States' withdrawal from the JCPOA and to Europe's breach and utter incapacity as a gross violation. They falsely presented themselves as parties of good standing to the agreement, and they disparaged Iran's sincere efforts as insufficient. All of this was in pursuit of nothing less than the destruction of the very JCPOA, which they themselves had once held as the foremost achievement of multilateral diplomacy. This unlawful measure, which has also met the opposition of certain members of the Security Council, possesses no international legitimacy and will not garner the approbation of the international community. I hereby declare once more before this assembly that Iran has never sought and will never seek to build a nuclear bomb. We do not seek nuclear weapons. This is our belief based on the edict issued by the Supreme Leader and by religious authorities. Therefore, we never sought weapons of mass destruction, nor will we ever seek them. Whereas those who disturb the peace and stability in the region lies in Israel, but Iran is the one that is being punished for those actions. There is a poem that roughly says something to the effect that someone on one side of the world does something to disturb the peace, and someone else is punished for those actions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran welcomes peace and stability. We believe that the future of our region and of the world must be built upon cooperation, trust, and shared development. In this framework, Iran supports the peace process between the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Armenia and hopes that its outcome shall be enduring and serve as a foundation for improved relations between these two neighboring states. Iran also hopes that the efforts to bring an end to the war in Ukraine may result in a just and lasting agreement between Russia and Ukraine and bring solace to the human suffering caused by this crisis. Iran welcomes the defensive pact between the two brotherly Muslim countries, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, as a beginning for a comprehensive regional security system with the cooperation of the Muslim states of West Asia in the political, security, and defense domains. Finally, Iran condemns the criminal aggression of the Israeli regime against Qatar, which resulted in the martyrdom of a number of Palestinian and Qatari nationals, and declares its support and solidarity with the government and people of Qatar. Ladies and gentlemen, true security is not achieved through force, but through confidence building, mutual respect, regional convergence, and multilateralism grounded in international laws. Based on this foundation, I call upon all to practice listening to one another instead of raising voices, to re-examine the intellectual premises of polarization and political violence, which today ensnares not only the international community, but also renders societies internally with tension and turmoil. To uphold as the common denominator of all beliefs and cultures the principles that whatever we do not approve for ourselves, we should not impose upon others, instead of distorting concepts and narratives with biased interpretations. To restore and rehabilitate the credibility of international laws, institutions, and mechanisms, and to commit to the establishment of a regional system of security and cooperation in West Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, we Iranians have extended our power in the world not by producing and employing nuclear weapons, nor by the slaughter of hundreds of thousands in the 20th century, nor by genocide and the imposition of starvation upon the children in Gaza in the 21st century, and not even through the historic empires of Iran, but rather through a culture of human fellowship and the message of empathy of universal sages such as Rumi, Hafiz, Saadi, who 8 centuries ago declared that human beings are members of a whole, in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is inflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human, you cannot pertain. Those criminals who bully by murdering children are not worthy of the name human being, and assuredly they shall never prove to be trustworthy partners. Relying upon its time-honored tradition of altruism and human fellowship, Iran is a steadfast partner and a trustworthy companion for all peace-seeking countries, a friendship and a partnership grounded not in fleeting expediency, but in dignity, trust, and a shared future. We, the upright people of Iran, by standing firm against lawless marauders, have surmounted with honor the injustices, discriminations, and double standards imposed upon us. And today, with an opportunity-oriented outlook, we have transformed this historic achievement of the Iranian people into a platform for a leap toward a hopeful future. Let us together with you turn threats into opportunities. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency José Raúl Mulino Quintero, President of the Republic of Panama. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Muy buenos días,
A very good
Señora
morning,
Presidenta,
Madam President,
distinguidos jefes de Estado,
distinguished heads
de
of
gobierno.
state and government,
honorables delegados.
honorable delegates.
En nombre del pueblo
On behalf
panameño,
of the Panamanian
con profundo
people,
respeto y
with
renovadas
profound
esperanzas,
respect and renewed
me
hope,
presento ante esta honorable
I appear
asamblea
before this honorable
en el
assembly
aniversario número 80
on the
de esta
80th
organización
anniversary of this
que
organization,
sigue siendo un faro para la
which
paz,
remains a
la
beacon
cooperación
for
y el
peace,
progreso.
cooperation, and progress.
Panamá se comprometió desde la Carta de San Francisco
Panama
en
has been committed since the signing of the
1945
Charter of San
en
Francisco
favor
in
de la
1945
pacificación,
to
la
peace
seguridad,
building,
el
security,
desarrollo sostenible y los
sustainable
derechos
development,
humanos.
and human rights.
En estas 8 décadas,
Over these 8
nuestro país
decades,
ha
our
apostado por la
country has
diplomacia
championed
multilateral
multilateral
y el
diplomacy
derecho
and
internacional
public
público como un
international
eje
law
cardinal de su
as a
política exterior.
cornerstone of our foreign policy.
La iniciativa ONU 80,
The UN 80
presentada
initiative,
por el secretario
presented
general
by
Antonio
the
Guterres,
Secretary General Antonio
ofrece la
Guterres,
oportunidad de
offers an
reflexionar
opportunity to
sobre el pasado,
reflect on the past,
hacer un llamado de atención por
to
las
raise
amenazas del
awareness
presente
of present
para
threats,
vislumbrar
and
un
to
futuro más
envision
justo.
a fairer future.
Tenemos la firme convicción de que hoy,
We
más que
firmly
nunca,
believe that today,
debemos
more than
fortalecer el
ever,
valor del
we must strengthen the
multilateralismo
value of
para
multilateralism
responder a los retos y crisis
respond
globales
to
como
global
herramienta
challenges and
de mitigar
crises
las
as
asimetrías
a
entre
tool
las
to
naciones.
mitigate asymmetries among nations.
En ese sentido,
In this regard,
quiero destacar
I
que la
wish to
política
highlight
multilateral
that multilateral
para que
policy
nuestro país,
contributed
por
to
ejemplo,
our
lograra
country's
salir de las listas
removal, for
discriminatorias
instance, from
donde nos había
discriminatory
colocado la Unión
lists
Europea
imposed by
y
the
el GAFI.
European Union and the Financial
Pues es
Action
una
Task Force.
incoherencia ser parte
Since
del
it does not
Consejo de
make
Seguridad
sense to
de
be a
esta
member of the
organización
Security Council of
y
this
a la vez compartir
organization,
listas con
while at the
países que
same
propician
time
el
appearing
terrorismo.
on lists alongside countries that promote
Consideramos
terrorism.
oportuna una reforma
We believe
integral
it is the right time to
para
undertake a
asegurar que el Consejo de
comprehensive
Seguridad
reform
sea más
to
efectivo,
make the Security
la
Council
Asamblea
more
General más
effective, to make the
representativa,
General Assembly more
las agencias
representative,
especializadas
to make
más
specialized
inclusivas
agencies
y
more
sobre todo
inclusive, and
reducir la
above all,
burocracia.
to reduce bureaucracy.
Panamá, al igual que otros países,
Panama,
pide
just
una
like other
mayor
countries,
representación de
calls for
América
greater
Latina y el
representation
Caribe
of Latin America
en los
and the
órganos de
Caribbean
toma de
in
decisiones.
decision-making bodies.
Ha llegado el momento
The
de
time
que
has
la
come
arquitectura de la
to
gobernanza
update
multilateral se
the
actualice.
architecture of multilateral governance.
Nuestra región es la
Our
principal
region is the
exportadora de
world's
alimentos del
leading
planeta.
exporter of
Tiene un
food.
canal estratégico
It
que
is
une
home to a
el
strategic
Atlántico con el
canal
Pacífico
linking the
y
Atlantic and the
detentamos más
Pacific,
del
and it holds more than
50% de la
50% of the
biodiversidad
planet's
del mundo.
biodiversity.
Somos grandes proveedores de
We are
minerales.
major suppliers of
Tenemos las
minerals.
mayores reservas
We possess
acuíferas.
the largest freshwater
Convivimos en
reserves.
paz
We live together in
luchamos por
peace
ella.
and we strive to preserve this.
Todos estos elementos nos
All of
transforman
these
en un
elements
actor
make
principal
us
a nivel
a
mundial
key global
y
actor,
debemos tener la representación
and
de acuerdo a
we
nuestro
must
rol
ensure
e
that our
importancia
representation
global,
reflects our role and our
cumpliendo con
global
su labor de
significance.
contener
In
y
line with our
evitar
mission to
el
contain and
trágico
prevent
desenlace de una
the
guerra
tragic
global,
outcome of a global
misión
war,
fundamental de
which
su
was
razón de
its
existir,
fundamental raison d'être,
la Organización de
the
Naciones Unidas
United
enfrenta
Nations is
además
also
el desafío de
facing a
impulsar
challenge
acciones
of promoting
urgentes
urgent
para
action
alcanzar los
to achieve
objetivos
the
de
Sustainable
desarrollo
Development
sostenible.
Goals.
El mundo se encuentra hoy ante tres crisis:
Today, the world is facing a
devastadoras todas.
trifecta of devastating
La
crises,
climática, la
climate change,
contaminación y la pérdida de
pollution, and
biodiversidad,
biodiversity loss,
en un escenario de cooperación
all against a backdrop
fragmentado.
of weakened cooperation.
La respuesta a estas
The
crisis
response to these
debe ser
crises
rápida
must be
y
swift
solidaria.
and united.
Ante esto,
In
Panamá
response,
presentó el
Panama
Nature Pledge,
has put
nuestro
forward
pacto
its
con la
nature pledge,
naturaleza.
which is our pact
Es
with
una
nature.
forma nueva
This is
de
a
entender la
new
política
way of
ambiental
understanding
y climática
environmental and
en
climate
un marco que
policy,
una nuestras obligaciones en
integrating
materia
our
de clima,
obligations on climate,
biodiversidad y
biodiversity,
tierras
and
en un
land
solo compromiso
into
nacional.
a single national
En
commitment.
la práctica, Panamá se
In
compromete a
practice,
reducir
Panama
sus
is pledging
emisiones
to
para el año
curb its emissions by
2035.
2035.
Aún siendo un país carbono
Even
negativo,
as a carbon negative
creemos que siempre
country,
se puede dar un
we
paso
believe
más
there's always
en favor
room
de
to
la
take further steps
sostenibilidad
towards
para las futuras
sustainability for
generaciones.
future generations.
Por ello, restauraremos 100.000 hectáreas
To
de
this end, we
ecosistemas
will be restoring
prioritarios,
100,000
incluyendo
hectares of
manglares y
priority
cuencas hidrográficas,
ecosystems, including
porque la
mangroves and
naturaleza es
water
nuestra primera
basins,
línea de
because
defensa
nature, we
frente al
think, is
cambio
our front
climático.
line of defense against climate change.
Panamá confía en una Naciones Unidas
Panama
renovada
trusts in a
que
renewed
fortalezca
United
la seguridad
Nations, one that
digital
strengthens
y
digital
la
security
cooperación
and
internacional con
international
criterios
cooperation
éticos y
with
con
ethical
participación
and inclusive
que acompañe
principles
transiciones
that
energéticas
supports just
justas
energy
y que
transitions
defienda la
and
libertad
one
de
that upholds
expresión.
freedom of expression.
En ese sentido, reiteramos el inalienable respeto a la
this
libertad y a
Spirit,
la
we
democracia
reaffirm
en
our
nuestra
unwavering
región,
respect for freedom
que
and
sigue
democracy in our
sufriendo
region,
inestabilidad
which
por
continues
parte
to
de
suffer
quienes
from
no
instability at
respetan
the
la
hands of
voluntad
those who
popular
disregard the
expresada en las
popular
urnas
will
o
expressed through the
simplemente
ballot
no
box,
permiten
or
elecciones
who
abiertas
simply
y
do not
transparentes.
permit open and transparent
Queremos
elections.
ser parte de una organización de Naciones
We
Unidas
aspire
capaz
to
de
be a
prevenir
member of the
conflictos
United Nations that is
antes de que
capable
ocurran,
of preventing
que
conflicts
pueda
before they
actuar con
arise, that
prontitud
can
en
better respond
emergencias
promptly to
humanitarias,
humanitarian
que
emergencies,
coordine mejor sus
that better
agencias
coordinates its field
a nivel de campo
agencies,
y que represente
and
más fielmente
that
la
more faithfully
diversidad de
represents the
personas en el mundo.
diversity of peoples across the globe.
Panamá se ha ofrecido
Panama
a
has
acoger
offered
oficinas de
to host
organizaciones del
offices
sistema
of
de las
United
Naciones
Nations
Unidas
system
en
organizations
apoyo a los
to
esfuerzos de
support
reforma en el
reform
marco
efforts
de la
under the
iniciativa
UN
ONU 80.
80 initiative.
También quiero expresar
I also
hoy
wish today
mi
to
solidaridad
express
con
my
el pueblo
solidarity
japonés
with the Japanese people.
en ocasión de
This on
cumplirse
the occasion of the
23 años de
23rd
la admisión por
anniversary
parte de
of
Corea del
North
Norte
Korea's admission
del secuestro
of
de al
its
menos
abduction
17
of at least
ciudadanos
17
japoneses.
Japanese nationals.
El mundo necesita saber la
The
verdad
world needs to know the
para que estos
truth
hechos no se
so that these
repitan.
events are never
Y
repeated.
Japón
And
merece
Japan
justicia.
deserves justice.
Señores y señoras,
Ladies and gentlemen,
no puedo dejar pasar esta oportunidad para destacar que hemos
I cannot let this
cumplido
opportunity
en un
pass
cuarto
without
de siglo
highlighting
desde que
that
nuestro
we have
canal
now
pasó a
completed a
manos
quarter
panameñas.
century since our canal
A
was
partir del
transferred into
31 de
Panamanian
diciembre de
hands. As of the
1999, la
31st
República de
December
Panamá
1999,
asumió
the
las
Republic
obras
of
y la
Panama
operación del
took up
canal
the
con
works and
eficiencia,
operations of the
seguridad,
canal
sostenibilidad y
efficiently,
neutralidad, de
safely,
acuerdo con el
sustainably,
Tratado
and
del Canal de
neutrally. This
Panamá,
in accordance with the
Torrijos-Carter, y el
Panama
de neutralidad
Canal Treaty,
permanente, ambos de
Torrijos-Carter Treaty, and the
1977.
Permanent Neutrality Treaty, which
Desde
were both signed
entonces,
in
hemos administrado de
1977.
manera ejemplar la
Since
vía
then,
acuática,
we have
contribuido al
administered the
desarrollo
waterway in
económico del
exemplary
país y
fashion,
operado el
contributed
canal
to
para
the country's
beneficio de la
economic
navegación
development,
internacional.
and operated the canal for the
En este
benefit of
periodo,
international
Panamá
navigation.
amplió la ruta
Over this
interoceánica
period,
con
Panama
recursos
expanded
propios
the interoceanic
para
route
atender la
using our
demanda
own
de buques
resources
de
to
grandes
meet the
dimensiones.
demand of larger vessels.
Ahora vamos a dar un paso más.
Now we are taking another step forward.
Acompañamos a la autoridad
We
del
are
Canal de
supporting
Panamá
the Panama
en el
Canal
desarrollo
Authority
del
in
reservorio
the
del Río
development
Indio,
of the Rio
un
Indio
ambicioso
Reservoir.
proyecto para
This is an
garantizar
ambitious
el
project
agua
to
a la
ensure
población
water
y
supply
al
for our
canal.
population
Así,
and
el
the
tráfico de
canal,
buques
so that
no se
vessel
verá
traffic
amenazado
is not
a causa
threatened
de las
by
sequías que
recurring
azotan de tiempo en tiempo nuestra región.
droughts in our region.
Nuestra vía acuática sirve a
Our
más de
waterway serves
180
more than
rutas marítimas y más de
180 maritime
140
routes
naciones.
and more than
Y por ella
140
transita
nations,
aproximadamente
and
4% del comercio
approximately
mundial.
4% of global trade
Tenemos el
passes through it.
compromiso de garantizar la
We are
eficiencia en
committed
favor
to
de la
ensuring
logística
efficiency in support
internacional.
of international logistics.
Ante esta asamblea,
Before this assembly,
Panamá reafirma
Panama
una vez
once
más
again reaffirms
su serio y
its
sostenido
serious and
compromiso
sustained
hacia
commitment
el
to
régimen
the regime
establecido en el
established
tratado
under the treaty
concerniente a la
concerning
neutralidad
permanent
permanente
neutrality,
y a cuyo
to
protocolo
which
se han adherido numerosos
numerous,
estados.
the protocol of which
La
numerous states have
neutralidad es la
adhered to.
fórmula más adecuada para
Neutrality is the
proteger la
best formula
seguridad de
to
nuestro
safeguard
canal,
the security of our
un bien de
canal,
utilidad
a
global.
global public good.
Canal de Panamá
The
neutral,
Panama Canal
abierto al
is
mundo
neutral,
y
open to the world,
facilitador de un
and
comercio
a
internacional
facilitator
más
of more
integrado,
integrated international
es y
trade.
seguirá siendo
It
panameño.
is and shall remain Panamanian.
Señoras y señores,
Ladies and gentlemen,
Panamá, como es sabido, mantiene un
Panama,
asiento
as
no
you
permanente
know,
en el
holds a
Consejo de
non-permanent
Seguridad de
seat on the
Naciones
United
Unidas
Nations
para
Security
el periodo
Council for the
2025-2026.
2025-2026
El
term.
pasado mes de agosto
This
hemos
past
ejercido la
August, we
presidencia
held the
rotativa del
rotating
Consejo,
presidency of the Security Council.
entendiéndola como una
We viewed this role as a
responsabilidad para mantener
responsibility to
una voz
maintain a
fuerte
strong
en favor
voice
de la
in
paz,
favor of
la igualdad
peace,
soberana de
sovereign
los
equality of
estados,
states,
la justicia,
justice,
el derecho internacional
international
y
law,
el respeto
and
a los
respect
pactos
for
entre
agreements
países.
among nations.
También hemos enfatizado la
We have also
importancia de la
stressed the
seguridad
importance of
marítima
maritime
como una
security
prioridad de
as
acción
a
para nuestra
priority during
participación en el
our
Consejo.
participation in the Council.
La identidad nacional de Panamá
Panama's
está
national
estrechamente
identity is
vinculada al
closely linked
transporte
to
marítimo.
maritime transport.
A lo largo de los siglos
Over
hemos
the
sabido
centuries, we
consolidar
have
nuestro papel
consolidated our
como un
role
actor
as a
clave en
key
la
actor
navegación
in
y el comercio
navigation and
internacional.
international
La
trade,
piratería, el
piracy,
tráfico de armas y narcóticos,
arms and drugs
así como la
trafficking,
pesca ilegal,
and illegal fishing
impactan al
all
comercio
affect
y al
trade
sistema de
and the
transporte
global
marítimo
maritime
global.
transport system.
Como nación de tránsito y
As
centro
a
logístico del
transit
continente,
nation and a
Panamá
logistic
sugiere
hub in our
fortalecer la
continent,
cooperación
Panama
entre agencias
proposes to strengthen
especializadas,
cooperation
incluyendo
among
una red
specialized
regional para
agencies,
promover
including through
la
a
seguridad
regional
marítima
network to
que
promote
opere bajo el
maritime
paraguas de la
security.
gobernanza
This would
oceánica
operate under the umbrella of
atenida al
ocean
derecho
governance and in
internacional.
accordance with international law.
Quiero reiterar en esta asamblea el
I wish to
trabajo que
reiterate
debe
before
hacer
this
este
assembly the
organismo
work that
para
this
mitigar los
organization
efectos de la
needs to
migración
undertake to
ilegal
mitigate the effects of
propiciada
illegal
por
migration
organizaciones
driven by
vinculadas directa o
organizations that are
indirectamente
either
al
directly
narcotráfico.
or indirectly linked to drugs
Por
trafficking.
nuestro Darién, frontera con Colombia, durante años pasaron
For
millones de
years,
personas
millions of people
y
have
en
been
un solo
passing
año
through
de
our
mi
Darien
gestión
region, which is on our border
redujimos
with
a
Colombia.
cero el
And yet,
flujo
in
de
just 1
migrantes
year in
hacia el norte.
office, we've reduced the flow of migrants heading
Esta
north to
crisis se
zero.
resolvió
That
cumpliendo
crisis
así la
was
promesa de
resolved,
cerrar
thus meeting the
los
promise
pasos
to shut
ilegales
down
por el
illegal
Darién.
crossings through the Darien.
Las consecuencias
The
humanitarias y
humanitarian and
ambientales
environmental
fueron
consequences
extremas.
were
El
extreme.
sufrimiento de
The
mujeres y
suffering
niños
of women
víctimas de
and
abusos
children
y la
subjected to
contaminación
abuse
de
and the
una de las
pollution
áreas más
of one
diversas
of the
del
world's
mundo
most biodiverse
aún generan
areas.
dolor en
These
quienes hemos
continue
tenido
to cause
contacto
pain
directo
to
con
those
esta
of us who
situación.
have had direct
Hoy
contact with the
tenemos una
situation.
migración norte-sur
Today we are
de mucho
seeing
menor escala,
north-south migration
pero
on
que
a much
renueva el
smaller
compromiso
scale,
con el tránsito
but which
ordenado de
renews our
personas
commitment to
para
the
que
orderly
puedan
transit of
retornar
people
a
so
sus
that they may
hogares.
return home.
Debo decir que el drama
I
migratorio
must
fue
say
solucionado,
that while the migratory
mas no
crisis
las
has been
causas que
resolved,
originaron
the
la
causes of
masiva
mass
migración de
immigration
personas.
remain unaddressed.
Que nuestro país haya resuelto este flagelo no
The fact that our
significa que
country has
debamos
resolved
cesar
this scourge
en el
doesn't
pedido
mean
de
that we should
respuestas
let up in our
concretas,
demands for
como en el
concrete
caso de la
responses,
frontera
such as in
entre
the case
Haití
of the
y
border
República
between Haiti
Dominicana,
and the Dominican
que
Republic,
enfrenta una migración
which is facing
descontrolada
unchecked
que también
migration
impacta
that
a toda
also
la
has an
región.
effect on the entire region.
Es fundamental encontrar
It's
soluciones
essential that we
claras
find clear
tanto para la
solutions both
crisis
for the
haitiana
Haitian
como
crisis
para el
and
control
more
efectivo del
generally
flujo
for
migratorio.
effective control of migratory flows.
Actualmente sufrimos el
We are
crecimiento de una
currently suffering
actividad
from the
ilícita,
growth of another illegal activity, which is drug
hoy
trafficking.
constituye una
Today
amenaza
it
para las
poses
vidas de
a
las
threat to
personas
human lives
y un
and
altísimo riesgo de
a
inestabilidad en
grave risk
toda la
of
región
instability throughout the
a
entire
través de los
region
distintos
due
carteles que
to
operan.
the different cartels
Para
operating
que
there.
tengan una idea,
Just to give you a quick idea,
solo en lo que va de este año,
this year
en
alone,
Panamá se han incautado
Panama
cerca
has
de
seized nearly
150 toneladas
150
métricas de
tons
cocaína
of
y otras drogas.
cocaine and other
Un hecho
drugs.
histórico y
This is
alarmante.
an historic and alarming figure,
Esto nos obliga a redoblar esfuerzos,
one which compels
contar
us
con
to
más
step up our
cooperación
efforts, to seek
y sumar
greater
recursos
cooperation
en una
and
lucha
to
que debe ser
galvanize
una causa
resources in a
común entre
struggle that
todas
must
las
be a
naciones del
common
mundo.
cause among all nations of the world.
Honorables miembros,
Honorable
el
members,
año entrante el Congreso
next year,
Anfictiónico de
the
Panamá, efectuado por el
Amphictyonic
libertador
Congress of
Simón
Panama,
Bolívar,
convened
celebrará
by the
su
liberator
bicentenario.
Simón Bolívar, will
Su
celebrate its
propuesta es un
bicentenary.
sistema internacional
Its
basado en la
proposal was for an
igualdad soberana de
international
los
system
estados,
based on the
la
sovereign equality
justicia,
of states,
el derecho y la
justice,
cooperación
law, and
internacional
international
para
cooperation
alcanzar
to
fines
achieve
comunes a los pueblos.
the people's common goals.
Esperamos que esta
We
conmemoración
hope that this
sirva como un nuevo
commemoration will
punto de
serve as
partida en la
a new
cooperación
starting
internacional
point
que
for
respete
international
y
cooperation,
enaltezca los valores
one
de
that respects
soberanía,
and elevates the
paz
values of
y
sovereignty,
coexistencia
peace, and
pacífica
peaceful
que deben guiar
coexistence,
nuestro trabajo
values that
en
must
este y
guide
los
our
demás
work
foros
in
del
this
mundo.
and other global fora.
Honorables miembros, ante este foro
Honorable
de la paz
members, before
mundial
this
y la
forum of
cooperación
global peace and
internacional,
international cooperation,
reitero la
I
fe del pueblo
reiterate the
panameño
faith
en
of
el
the
sistema de
Panamanian
las Naciones
people
Unidas.
in the United Nations system.
En tiempos de crisis,
At times of
cuando soplan los
crisis, when
vientos
the
de
winds of
unilateralismo,
unilateralism, polarization, and fragmentation are
Panamá
blowing,
hará oír su
Panama
voz en
will
defensa
raise
del
its voice in defense of
multilateralismo.
multilateralism.
Panamá seguirá siendo
Panama
miembro
will remain
entusiasta
an
de las Naciones
enthusiastic
Unidas,
member of the United
defensor del
Nations,
derecho
a defender of
internacional
international
e
law,
incansable
and a
promotor de la
tireless
paz mundial.
proponent of global peace.
Porque como dice el lema que nos
Because, as
convoca
this
hoy,
year's theme reminds
unidos
us,
somos más fuertes.
we are stronger together,
Y cuando estemos
and
unidos,
only together can
podremos
we
construir un
build a
futuro más
fairer
justo
and more
y humano
humane
para todos.
future for all.
Muchísimas gracias por
Thank
esta
you very
oportunidad.
much.
Muchas gracias. On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Panama. As the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Peter Pavel, President of the Czech Republic, I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am humbled to speak here in front of you again. Today, I wish to address two main issues: United Nations achievements and necessity of its reform, and prospect of multilateralism in the light of Russian aggression. 80 years ago, the United Nations was founded with great hope to prevent war and destruction, never to repeat the horrors of World War II. My country proudly stood amongst the founding nations, signing the charter that would become our collective moral compass. Since 1945, we have witnessed remarkable achievements. The United Nations helped to prevent another full-scale world conflict. It assisted in dissolution of colonialism and rise of new sovereign countries in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. Together, we created a robust multilateral system of rules and global cooperation in international security, human rights, and economic development. Together with the UN, we have fought famine, disease, illiteracy, and poverty in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. Dozens of peacekeeping missions have helped to ease tensions in conflict zones. Thanks to its long-standing efforts, the UN has helped transform countless lives and laid the groundwork for a better world, a world which is more humane and more cooperative. It provided a platform where even the smallest nations can speak out and be heard. The UN remains the only institution where the world can collectively confront global crises. Not with weapons, but with dialogue, shared responsibility, and pressure where necessary. UN's greatest achievement is not perfection, it's persistence. With many devastating conflicts ongoing, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has significantly transformed the global security landscape. Since the last general debate a year ago, our world has not become more secure. On the contrary. In the game of smoke and mirrors, Russia continues targeting civilians, civilian infrastructure, foreign diplomatic missions, and most recently, even our neighboring country, Poland. Not to forget the acts of hybrid warfare on our own territory. These range from disinformation campaigns and attempts to undermine public trust, to cyber attacks, and even acts of sabotage carried out by mercenaries recruited online. Despite being the largest country on the map, Russia still aims to seize Ukrainian territory and expand its sphere of influence. Backed by China, Iran, North Korea, and other countries that help it circumvent sanctions and provide economic or political support. Russia, a permanent member of UN Security Council, is not only violating the principles of state sovereignty and territorial integrity enshrined in the UN Charter, but also sets a dangerous example and precedent that aggression can yield territorial and political gain and remain unpunished. Ladies and gentlemen, our multilateral system was created on the premise that rules apply to all without exception. The consequences of this war go far beyond the news headlines. This war threatens to dismantle our system of governance based on mutual respect, equal partnership, and rules we all subscribe to. What is happening in Europe today could happen anywhere else tomorrow, under different circumstances, but under the exact same pretext. If Russia wins this unjust war, it will legitimize the triumph of brute force. Turning a blind eye to Ukraine today is a green light to any future aggressor anywhere in the world. Disruptions of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait or elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific would further destabilize global security and trade. Geographical distance offers no protection. Security in one part of the world is directly linked to security everywhere. Tolerating the principle of might makes right will lead to the end of multilateralism and the beginning of life under principles dictated by a powerful few. It would be a future with history deliberately rewritten, with lies promoted as facts, and with truth slowly disappearing from our discourse and memory. Just the opposite of what most of our nations fought for in the previous century. The heroism of Ukrainian people, their willingness to sacrifice for freedom, and global solidarity with Ukraine demonstrate that most of us still believe in universal values and in our responsibility to defend them. To achieve sustainable peace, we democratic allies from all over the world must act in unity and intensify our economic pressure on Russia. This is the only way to bring the aggressor to the negotiating table. Such peace, based on the existing international law, including territorial integrity and the right of self-determination, is in the interest of not only European countries, but of the whole international community. Any future peace agreement must send a clear message worldwide that aggressor must not be rewarded and borders cannot be changed by force. Ladies and gentlemen, the structure of the UN was based on the outcome of the World War II. Today, one of the UN Security Council permanent members is waging a ruthless war while obstructing any constructive solutions put forward. It is in light of these new geopolitical realities that we need a strong and effective UN system capable of responding to today's global challenges, from security threats and climate change to rapid evolution of new technologies. Otherwise, we risk sliding into a world that is more fragmented, more dangerous, and far less predictable. Czechia welcomes the UN 80 initiative and the commitments in the Pact for Future. Yet these ambitions stand in stark contrast with today's reality. In the light of Russian aggression against Ukraine, the UN Security Council is currently failing its purpose and mission. Therefore, we advocate for a comprehensive reform of the UN Security Council for greater effectiveness, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability, with the aim to honor the principles of the UN Charter and to strengthen the voice of underrepresented regions. Freedom and human rights are not granted entitlements. They are hard-won principles that must be cherished and protected. Security Council membership should not be seen as a matter of prestige or privilege, but above all, a responsibility to defend global peace. That's why Czechia is seeking a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council for the term 2032-33, with a clear commitment to uphold the rules-based international order. We cannot afford to have the UN paralyzed or blocked in its ability to respond to crises and challenges. Current urgent crises are already consuming too much of our attention and resources at the expense of other major, equally pressing issues. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned in the beginning of my speech, the UN significantly improved the quality of life of billions, including through access to education, healthcare, and services. In this year's Sustainable Development Report, Czechia ranked 10th out of 167 countries. I am fortunate to be a citizen of a country which by global standards offers a secure and comfortable life. This doesn't mean that there are no challenges. Much work still lies ahead if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, both at home and globally. After all, most of the challenges we are facing are global. No single nation is powerful enough to succeed alone. That is why we need more dialogue. That is why we need greater cooperation and collective action. And ultimately, that is why multilateralism must not only survive, it must thrive. Not only for us, but most importantly, for future generations. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Czech Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Karen Keller-Sutter, President of the First Confederation. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente de
Madam
l'Assemblée
President of the General
Générale,
Assembly,
Excellences,
Excellencies,
Mesdames,
ladies
Messieurs,
and gentlemen,
il y a 80 ans, le monde
80
entrait
years
dans une
ago,
nouvelle
the
ère
world entered a
des temps
new
meilleurs.
era, better
Le
times.
27 janvier
On the
1945,
27th of January
le camp de
1945,
concentration
the
d'Auschwitz était
Auschwitz
libéré.
concentration camp was
Le 8 mai,
liberated.
la guerre en
On the
Europe
8th of
prenait
May
fin.
1945,
Et
the
le
war in
25
Europe ended,
juin,
and on 25
50
June
États adoptaient la Charte des Nations
1945,
Unies à
50
San
states adopted the
Francisco.
United Nations Charter
Ils
in
étaient,
San
je cite,
Francisco.
résolus à
And I
préserver les
quote from the charter,
générations
they were
futures
determined
du
to
fléau de
save
la guerre
succeeding
qui, deux
generations
fois en
from the
l'espace
scourge of
d'une vie
war,
humaine,
which twice in
infligeait
our
à
lifetime has
l'humanité
brought
d'indicibles
untold sorrow
souffrances.
to
Fin de
mankind.
citation.
End of quote.
Sur les ruines de la
Upon the
Deuxième Guerre
ruins of the
mondiale, un
Second World
nouvel
War,
ordre naissait
a
d'une
new
conviction
international
et
order
d'une
was
volonté
born out of a
commune
shared conviction
d'apporter
and
au monde
determination
de
to
la paix
bring
et la
peace
prospérité.
and prosperity
C'est aussi
to
au
the
lendemain des
world.
horreurs de
The
cette
horrors
période
of
que
this time
naissaient les
also gave
conventions de
rise
Genève
to Geneva
1949
Conventions of
qui
1949,
protègent les victimes de
which
conflits armés.
protect the
À cette
victims of
époque,
armed
les
conflict.
fondements de décennies
At that
florissantes
time, the
pour la
foundations
démocratie,
for
l'état de droit
progress and democracy,
et
the rule
l'économie
of
de
law,
marché
and the
étaient
market
posés.
economy were
Des
laid
fondements qui,
down.
malgré les limites et les
Foundations
revers,
which, despite
ont
all the
servi aussi la
limitations and
coopération
setbacks,
internationale, le
also
libre-échange,
benefited
la paix
international
et le
cooperation,
droit
free trade,
international.
peace, and international
Sans faire de
law.
parallèle historique,
Without
force
drawing any
est de
historical
constater, nous
parallels, it is
célébrons
clear
cette année le
that this
80e
year, as
anniversaire
we
des
mark the
Nations
80th
Unies,
anniversary of the United
alors que nous
Nations,
vivons une nouvelle
we
époque de
are
bouleversements
experiencing
politiques et
a new
économiques
era
extrêmement
of
violents.
particularly
Une époque où
extreme
trop de
political
guerres
and
font un
economic
nouveau rage
upheaval, at
et
a
où les
time when,
populations
once
subissent des
again, too many
souffrances
wars
intolérables.
are raging,
Une
with civilian
époque où une paix juste et
populations
durable
experiencing
semble
unbearable
toujours hors de
suffering,
portée
a
au
time in which a
Proche-Orient
just lasting
et
peace in the
en
Middle East
Ukraine,
and
où
Ukraine
les
still
tendances
seems
autocratiques se
beyond
renforcent
reach,
en Europe
and
aussi.
during which
Une
autocratic
époque où le
tendencies are gaining
libre-échange
ground,
est mis à
including in
l'épreuve
Europe,
et où
a
en
time
fin
in
de
which
compte,
free trade
le
is
droit
being put to the
international,
test,
y
and
compris la Charte des
where
Nations Unies,
ultimately
risque de
international law,
devenir
including the
lettre
Charter
morte.
of the United
Ce
Nations,
sont des
risks
bouleversements qui ne viennent
becoming
pas de nulle part.
dead letter.
Ils
These
sont le
upheavals are
résultat
not coming out of
d'évolutions qui
nowhere.
remontent
They are the result
parfois
of
loin
developments
et
that,
que
in
l'on a
some cases, date
rétrospectivement
back a
trop
long
longtemps
time,
pris
in which, in
trop peu
retrospect,
au
we
sérieux.
fail to take
Il faut être
seriously
honnête.
enough for
Ce
far
sont
too
des
long.
évolutions pour
We need to
lesquelles
be
il n'y a pas
honest
de
with
réponse
ourselves. These are
facile,
developments that
ni
have
au
no
niveau
simple
international,
solutions,
ni au niveau
neither at the
national.
international
Et il
nor
ne
at the
suffit pas non
national
plus de
levels,
rappeler ici,
nor is it
pour
enough
la énième
today to
fois et
reiterate
seulement par des
yet
discours,
again,
les mérites
merely in
d'une certaine
speeches,
forme
the
d'État,
merits of a
de l'État
particular
de droit,
form
du
of
droit
government,
international,
the
du
rule of law,
libre-échange et du
international law, free
multilatéralisme.
trade, and
Non, si nous
multilateralism.
voulons relever
No,
les défis
if
auxquels
we
nous
wish
sommes
to surmount the
confrontés,
challenges
nous
which we
devons
face,
redoubler
we have
nos
the duty to
efforts.
redouble
Car
our
que valent
efforts.
tous les acquis de
For
la civilisation
what is
s'ils
the
ne contribuent pas
the
concrètement à
benefit
la
of the
liberté,
achievements
à la
of
sécurité
civilization? What are
et à
they
la
worth if they do not
prospérité
tangibly
si
contribute
leurs
to freedom,
avantages ne
security,
deviennent
and
pas
prosperity,
tangibles pour les
if they do
populations
not
dans leur
bring
vie de
tangible
tous les
benefits
jours?
for people in their
Il y a deux
day-to-day
erreurs
lives?
que nous devons
There
pas
are
faire.
two errors which we
Premièrement,
must not
pointer
make.
du doigt
Firstly,
uniquement les autres
pointing the
États.
finger only at
Deuxièmement,
others.
laisser les
Secondly,
organisations
leaving
internationales
international
seules
organizations
avec le travail et
alone
faire comme
to
si elles
work
étaient
alone
distinctes
and
de nous.
acting as if they were
Mesdames,
completely
Messieurs,
detached from us.
nous devrions
Ladies and
commencer là où
gentlemen,
nous
we need to
pouvons dès maintenant
begin where we
garantir la
can guarantee
liberté et
freedom
contribuer
and
à la
contribute to
sécurité et à la
security and
prospérité.
prosperity right
Et c'est
now.
en général chez
And
nous,
generally, this
dans
is
notre
at
propre
home,
pays.
within our own
Entendons-nous
countries.
bien. Il ne s'agit pas de faire
Let me
l'éloge
be
de
clear, this is
l'égoïsme
not about
national,
praising national
ni de condamner
self-interest,
le
nor is this about
multilatéralisme.
condemning
Bien au contraire,
multilateralism. Quite
la
to the
Suisse est
contrary,
convaincue que le
Switzerland is
multilatéralisme,
convinced
que
that
les
multilateralism,
organisations internationales,
international
que les
organizations,
Nations Unies
the United
sont
Nations
essentielles à
are
la coexistence
essential
pacifique
for the
des
peaceful
peuples,
coexistence
à la
of
prospérité
peoples,
économique
for
mondiale,
global
à la
economic
résolution de défis
prosperity,
tels
for the
que la
resolution of
migration, le
challenges,
changement
including
climatique,
migration,
la
climate
transition
change,
numérique,
the
et
digital
je le dis aussi en
transition,
tant que
and
ministre des Finances,
as
à la stabilité
finance minister, I would
financière
also add
mondiale.
for global
L'année
financial
dernière, nous avons
stability.
adopté ensemble le
Last
pacte pour
year,
l'avenir, un
we
engagement
together
fort
adopted
en
the Pact for
faveur
the
du
Future, a
multilatéralisme
robust
dans
commitment to
l'agenda 2030
multilateralism.
pour le développement
An essential
durable
pillar of that pact is the
constitue donc
2030
l'un des des piliers,
agenda
nous
for
devons mettre en
sustainable
œuvre ces feuilles
development,
de route sans délai.
we must now
La Suisse est
implement
aussi
these
convaincue
roadmaps
que la
without delay.
Genève internationale
Switzerland is
peut
also
apporter
convinced that
une
International Geneva
contribution
can make
unique à
a
la
unique
réalisation de ces
contribution to the
objectifs.
attainment of these
Genève, en
goals.
tant que premier
Geneva,
centre
as the United
opérationnel
Nations
onusien,
leading operational
dispose
center,
d'une forte
has
expertise dans de
robust
nombreux domaines
expertise in
cruciaux pour
numerous
notre
crucial
avenir,
areas for
liés
future,
notamment à
particularly
l'humanité
those
et à
related to humanity
l'innovation.
and
Il s'agit d'un
innovation. This is a
écosystème sans
unique
égal pour réfléchir,
a unique,
discuter et agir
unparalleled
ensemble.
ecosystem for reflection,
Mais toute organisation
discussion,
internationale
and
forte
concerted
a
action.
besoin de membres
But
forts.
a strong
Et
international
quand je dis
organization
fort, je ne
needs strong
parle pas
members.
de
And when I say
force
strong,
par
I
la
do not
taille
mean
ou par la puissance
strength
militaire.
in terms of
Je parle
size or
d'États qui
strength
sont
in
en
terms of
mesure de
military might. I am
permettre
talking
à
about
leurs
states
citoyens de
that are in a
s'épanouir.
position to
Et je dirais
provide their
aussi de
citizens with an
s'exprimer
environment in which they're able
librement
to
en toute
flourish
sécurité.
and to
Une
express
sécurité non
themselves
seulement
freely
militaire, mais
and in
aussi
complete
juridique,
safety and security.
économique
Security not
et
just in the
sociale.
military sense, but also
La
at the
sécurité et la
legal,
liberté sont les
economic, and
conditions
social security
préalables
level. Security and
essentielles
freedom
au
are
développement
essential
économique et
prerequisites
donc à
for
la
economic
prospérité.
growth and
Elles
therefore for
nécessitent des
prosperity.
institutions qui
They
soient
require
juridiquement
institutions that
solides,
are legally
fiables
sound,
et capables d'agir.
reliable, and
Et elles
capable of taking
nécessitent une
action.
stabilité
And they
politique,
require
sociale
political,
et financière.
social, and
Et là,
financial
chaque
stability.
État doit également assumer
And
ses
here,
propres
each state
responsabilités.
has an obligation to
Nous ne pouvons
shoulder its
pas
own
simplement les
responsibilities. We
déléguer
cannot simply
à une
delegate our
organisation
responsibilities
internationale.
to an international organization.
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Ladies,
la
gentlemen,
communauté internationale
the
ne peut que
international
profiter
community
de la force intérieure,
cannot but
de la
benefit from the
prospérité
domestic
et de la
strength,
stabilité de chaque
prosperity,
État.
and stability of
Seuls
each
les États
state.
solides sur le plan
Only
intérieur
strong
peuvent être
states,
véritablement
strong
solidaires
domestically,
et
can
contribuer
demonstrate
à une
true
communauté
solidarity and
internationale
contribute
prospère.
to a
Mais
successful,
nous devons
prosperous
redoubler
international
les
community.
efforts
But
aussi
we
en
need to also
tant
redouble our
que communauté
efforts as
internationale.
an international community.
Aujourd'hui, surtout, les
Today,
Nations Unies doivent
more than
elles
ever
aussi se
before, the
mettre en
United
question,
Nations must
se
also
remettre en
take
question.
a
Sont-elles
critical
encore
look
en mesure
at
de remplir
itself
leur mission
to
comme les
consider
50
whether
États
it
l'avaient
is still
prévu
able
le
to fulfill
25
its
juin
role as the 50
1945 à
states
San
intended
Francisco
when they adopted
lorsqu'ils
the
adoptaient
charter
la charte.
in San
Le
Francisco on 25 June
multilatéralisme connaît lui aussi des
1945.
bouleversements sans précédent.
Multilateralism is
Ces
also undergoing
bouleversements sont marqués par
unprecedented
une
upheaval.
recrudescence
These
des
upheavals are
violations du cadre
punctuated by a
normatif et des
resurgence of
principes et
violations in the
valeurs
normative
mêmes
framework
qui fondent
and the
l'action
very
multilatérale.
principles and values
Le
that
dialogue,
underpin
la
multilateral
coopération, la
action.
recherche du
Dialogue,
consensus,
cooperation,
le
consensus
respect du
building,
droit
respect for
international et
international
l'égalité
law,
souveraine
and
entre
sovereign
États,
equality of
quelle que soit leur
states,
taille ou leur
regardless of
poids économique ou
size, of
politique.
economic strength, or political
La Suisse
influence.
appelle tous les États
Switzerland calls
à un
upon all
engagement
states
ferme en
to
soutien des
make a
principes et
firm
valeurs
commitment
comme ils étaient
to
déclarés
uphold the
dans la
principles
Charte
and
des Nations
values
Unies il
enshrined
y a
in
80
the
ans.
Charter of the
C'est
United
le
Nations
prélude à
80
toute
years ago.
réflexion
This is the
sur les
prelude to
réformes et les
any
mesures
reflection
d'efficacité
on
qui doivent
reforms
renforcer
and
l'impact de
efficiency
notre action
measures to
dans les trois
strengthen the impact
piliers
of
de
our actions in the
l'organisation.
three pillars of the
À cet égard,
organization.
nous
With
soutenons
this in mind, we
pleinement le
fully
programme de
support
réforme ONU
the
80 du
UN
secrétaire
80
général.
reform program of the
Le
Secretary
renforcement de
General.
l'efficacité, de la cohérence,
Greater
de l'agilité
effectiveness,
et
coherence,
de l'impact
agility,
de
and
l'action
impact of
multilatérale doit
multilateral
guider
action
chacune
should
de nos
each
décisions.
guide
Une
our
approche structurée
decisions.
et
A
réfléchie visant
structured,
à
well
définir
thought through
ensemble
approach
l'ONU de
together
demain
for
est
defining the
essentielle.
UN of the future
Je
is
peux vous
vital.
assurer
I
que
can
la Suisse
assure you that
continuera
Switzerland will
d'œuvrer en
continue
faveur
to
des
work
efforts de réforme
towards
d'une ONU
reform.
plus
We remain
efficace
committed to the
et
reform
d'un
efforts to a more effective and
multilatéralisme
efficient United
pérenne,
Nations and to
à la
sustainable
fois en tant
multilateralism,
qu'État d'hôte
both as a
fiable et
reliable
en tant
host state
d'État membre
and
engagé.
as a committed member
Madame la
state.
Présidente, Excellences, Mesdames,
Excellencies,
Messieurs,
ladies and
nous ne sommes pas
gentlemen,
toujours dans la même situation
we are
qu'il y a
not
80
in the
ans.
same situation today
Nous
as we
sommes
were
en
80
plein
years
dans une
ago.
phase
We
critique et
are
le prochain
in the midst
chapitre
of
de
a
l'histoire
critical
n'est pas encore
phase,
écrit.
and the next chapter
Cela
of history
signifie
is
que nous
yet to be
pouvons
written.
participer
This also
activement
means
à
that
son
we can
écriture.
play an active
Je
role
cite
in
un
shaping it.
survivant
And I
d'Auschwitz,
quote an
l'écrivain
Auschwitz
italien
survivor,
Primo
the
Levi.
Italian writer
C'est
Primo
arrivé,
Levi.
cela peut donc
It
arriver
happened.
de nouveau.
Therefore, it could
Tel est
happen
le
again.
noyau de ce que nous avons
This
à
is the
dire.
core
Fin de
of what we
citation.
have to say.
Mais cela ne doit
End
pas
of
se
quote.
reproduire.
But it
Et en
doesn't
fait,
have to
cela
happen
ne doit
again.
pas se
And indeed, it
reproduire.
must
C'est
not
pourquoi les
happen
Nations Unies
again.
ont été
This is
créées
why the
il y a
United
80 ans.
Nations was
C'est
created
pour ça
80 years
aussi que
ago.
nous sommes
And this
là
is also
aujourd'hui.
why we are
C'est à nous de faire
here
en sorte que ce
today.
tournant de
It is up to
l'histoire
us to
dont
ensure
on
that
parle si
this
souvent
turning
aujourd'hui,
point in
comme
history, which is so
aussi il y a
often
80
invoked,
ans, ouvre une
as
nouvelle
was the case
ère
80
pour de
years
temps
ago, for
meilleurs.
this to usher in a
Gardons-nous de
new era
l'arrogance et
of
de la
better times. Let us
facilité
guard against
et mettons-nous au
arrogance and
travail,
complacency, and
chez
let us
nous,
get to work
dans notre pays
at
et
home,
ensemble
in our
aux Nations
countries,
Unies.
and
Je vous
together at the
remercie.
United Nations. Thank you.
Merci. I thank on behalf of the Assembly, the President of the Swiss Confederation. The Assembly will hear now an address by His Excellency Edgars Rinkēvičs, President of the Republic of Latvia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. First of all, allow me to congratulate Your Excellency, Madam Annalena Baerbock, on assuming the presidency of the General Assembly. You will have Latvia's full cooperation. Latvia believes that we are stronger together, stronger in advancing peace, fostering development, upholding human rights. Standing here on this world stage, I would like to congratulate us on the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. 80 years working together to build a better, more just and peaceful world. This task has never been easy, but it is our duty to persist with determination and give our very best. I want to express Latvia's gratitude for the overwhelming support for our candidacy for the United Nations Security Council. We are beginning our term next year. This is our first term. Latvia will take on this responsibility with a strong sense of duty, a duty to serve with integrity, transparency, and with a clear commitment to the principles of the United Nations. Latvia is honored to serve on the Security Council for the good of people around the world. And we will stand together for peace and resilience. Latvia's three priorities in the Security Council are: first, protect our rules-based international order. Second, advocate for women, peace, and security agenda. Also protect the most vulnerable people amongst us. Third, find solutions to emerging security threats. These include climate change, hybrid threats, the challenges related to the safety of artificial intelligence. Excellencies, the world is in disarray. Before our eyes, we see blatant attempts to weaken or even to destroy the rules-based international order, the order that is rooted in the United Nations Charter. In effect, a new world order is emerging, and it is not a better one. There is an attempt to recreate the world where the might makes right. The permanent members of the Security Council undertook to maintain international peace and security, to prevent wars, to prevent devastation and loss of life. But it seems that one permanent member, Russia, doesn't want this. Russia wants a world where brute force prevails over international law. Russia does not want peace. Russia wants to get what it wants. And Russia is willing to inflict destruction and misery on others. Unfortunately, Russia has partners in crime, notably Iran and North Korea. Ukraine is fighting back bravely. This is all it has. Ukraine is facing an existential threat to its people, to its land, to its freedom. Ukraine is fighting for all of us, for the rules-based international order, for independence and sovereignty, for territorial integrity, so that international borders are not changed by force. These actually are the very principles at heart of the United Nations. Latvia stands with Ukraine and will advocate for its sovereignty and territorial integrity at the United Nations Security Council. We are and we will be advocates for Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. They must be returned. We will be advocates for the Ukrainian civilians who have lost their homes and livelihoods. Latvia will use its position on the United Nations Security Council to help achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. I want to express my appreciation to President Trump, President Zelenskyy, and my European colleagues for their efforts to achieve peace, for trying to stop the unnecessary destruction and the misery we are witnessing in Ukraine. It is our collective duty to uphold the principles of the United Nations Charter, especially when a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council openly violates them. We need no reminding that the United Nations was founded on the ruins of the World War II, to save future generations from the scourge of war, to maintain international peace and security, to protect human life. Distinguished delegates, in war, it is the most innocent that pay the highest price. It is our duty to strengthen international cooperation to tackle the escalating crisis in Gaza. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza continues to spiral. Urgent action is needed to end civilian suffering. Latvia condemns all terrorist attacks. Nothing can justify terrorism. We recognize Israel's legitimate right to self-defense, but it must be exercised in line with the international law and particularly international humanitarian law. The law is there to protect every one of us. Latvia calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The terrorist organization Hamas must release all hostages. Hamas must be destroyed, as this organization is responsible for so much human suffering in the region. We need to ensure that the access to humanitarian aid in Gaza is safe and unconditional. The ongoing escalation confirms the need for a sustainable political solution, the need for a two-state solution in accordance with international parameters, the need to break the cycle of violence, to reach a just and lasting peace, a peace that addresses the security concerns and the legitimate aspirations of both the Israelis and Palestinians. Latvia is keenly aware of the ongoing conflicts around the world. We must work together to resolve the dire humanitarian situation in Sudan and Democratic Republic of the Congo. We will not look on helplessly as crises unfold. As a member of the Security Council, we will call on the international community to take collective action and to facilitate humanitarian aid, to try to end unnecessary human suffering. Distinguished delegates, we must do everything in our power to protect the most vulnerable people, especially women and children. Women and girls suffer disproportionately in times of war. We, the global community, have a responsibility to protect the rights of women and girls, to empower them, to ensure their voices are heard in peace processes. The first deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia is beyond disturbing. We call on the United Nations to do more, do much more. We will do all we can to help bring these children home. Madam President, it is not only conventional warfare that threatens peace, security, and stability. Emerging threats like climate change, cyber attacks, hybrid attacks, and the misuse of the artificial intelligence are testing us on a daily basis. Our modern world is connected in ways that most of us can't imagine. Today, many countries are experiencing a growing wave of hybrid attacks, also Latvia. We have to deal with damage to undersea cables, GPS jamming, arson attacks, the Russian shadow fleets. Russia continues and actually invests in new provocations, most recently recklessly violating the airspace of Poland and Estonia. The intensity of Russia's drone attacks against Ukraine has created incidents in Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania. This is the new reality. Russia bears full responsibility for these acts and also consequences. This kind of reckless behavior is a direct threat to international peace and security, and we must act to stop it before such acts spiral out of control. We must counter these threats by resilience and increased cooperation with our friends and allies. But hybrid warfare is evolving, as are emerging and disruptive technologies. The challenge is to maximize the benefits these technologies can bring, while remaining vigilant of the potential risk they pose. We share the United Nations view that we need to develop artificial intelligence responsibly, but we should not halt the progress. Artificial intelligence can promote economic growth, drive scientific progress and innovation, even improve healthcare and make education more accessible. Artificial intelligence is already part of our daily lives. We must acknowledge this reality and work to make it safer and more beneficial for the people. The governments should not take years to create regulations. We should act swiftly and do it right. As a responsible United Nations member, a future UN Security Council member, Latvia is ready to work with our partners to address these issues. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations has stood the test of time for 80 years. It is the primary architect of international law and protector of rules-based international order. The United Nations is not perfect, but it is the best we have, the only truly global organization. As one of UN Secretary Generals, Dag Hammarskjöld, famously said, the United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from the hell. But after 80 years, it is time to adjust to new realities. The United Nations must evolve to remain relevant, to be effective and fit for the challenges ahead. That's why we support the UN-80 initiative by the Secretary General. Let us work together for peace and resilience. Let us protect the rules-based international order and the United Nations Charter, because we all are better together. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Latvia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, the President of the 88th session of the UN General Assembly, Madam Annalena Baerbock, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I congratulate you, Madam President, on your election to preside over the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. Madam President, you can count on Kenya's full support throughout your tenure as you steer the Assembly into the future. Ladies and gentlemen, 8 years ago, in the aftermath of the unprecedented global destruction and devastating war, the international community came together in hope. They created this organization, the United Nations, as a shield against the horrors of war, as a platform for dialogue, and as a bridge to a better, fairer, more secure global community. What is often forgotten or not mentioned today is that the United Nations grew out of the failure of the League of Nations, that existed between 1919 and 1945. The League of Nations did not collapse for lack of good intentions or noble objectives. Formed at the end of the First World War and as part of the Treaty of Versailles, it was humanity's first attempt to build a permanent international organization to stop aggression and war and bring nations together. Its ambitions were to achieve collective global security, disarmament, peaceful dispute resolution, and cooperation on humanitarian and social issues. Despite these ideals, the League of Nations failed. The United States never joined, other great powers came and went, and without enforcement authority, its condemnation carried little weight. When Japan invaded Manchuria, when Italy marched into Ethiopia, and when Hitler openly defied its rules, the League stood by, helpless and powerless. By the late 1930s, its credibility had collapsed, and with the outbreak of the World War II, it was rendered irrelevant. Madam President, this history is both a lesson and a warning. Institutions rarely fail because they lack vision or ideals. More often, they drift into irrelevance when they do not adapt, when they hesitate to act, and when they lose legitimacy. To remain relevant, institutions must be reimagined, must be reformed, renewed, and aligned with emerging realities. 8 decades ago, the founders of the UN sought to correct the failures of the League of Nations by creating a stronger, more inclusive organization anchored in the principles of, and I quote, "We the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," end of quote. Today, we are gathered for the UN at 80. The question is unavoidable. Is the United Nations relevant to the demands of our time? Can it continue to serve humanity in the face of current realities? Or has it become a relic of a bygone era? Madam President, Excellencies, we meet against a grim global backdrop. Conflict rages in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, and beyond. Climate disasters grow fiercer by the day. Inequality deepens, pandemics loom, and technological disruptions outpaces governance. Instead of trust, mistrust is spreading. Instead of solidarity, fragmentation is taking root. In place of hope, anxiety fills our global community. We are living, to borrow from the words of the founders of this institution, not in larger freedom, but in growing uncertainty. At this moment of turbulence, when we most need a strong United Nations, the organization faces its deepest crisis in credibility and capacity. Funding cuts have paralyzed its operations. Bureaucracy has slowed its response. The Security Council remains frozen in the post-war structures of 1945, unable to act inclusively, with fairness, and with speed. Ladies and gentlemen, I can, however, state with absolute conviction that the United Nations has been one of humanity's greatest achievements. For 8 decades, it has held back the specter of global war, calmed conflicts from Cambodia to Liberia, and stood guard in some of the world's most dangerous places through the courage of its peacemakers and peacekeepers. Few institutions in humanity's history can claim such a legacy. The United Nations has stood at the front lines of humanitarian crisis, from famine relief in the Horn of Africa to emergency shelter for millions of Syrian and Ukrainian refugees. It was at the forefront in the eradication of smallpox, coordinated global responses to HIV and AIDS, Ebola, and COVID-19, and continues to champion universal vaccination. Its agencies have advanced women's rights, protected children, safeguarded refugees, and set global norms on everything from disarmament to climate action. The UN Sustainable Development Goals remain a shared blueprint for human progress. These are achievements no nation could have achieved alone, however rich, however great, or however powerful. And yet, every institution, no matter how noble its origins or impactful its legacy, must adapt to changing times or slide into irrelevance. Today, the United Nations stands at a crossroads of renewal on one hand or decay on another. Put differently, after 80 years, the rhymes of time are calling on us to reimagine the original promise that inspired the founding of the United Nations, and that is the quest for global peace, development, and human rights. But this call must now be answered in a global context that is profoundly different from the post-war era in which the UN was conceived then. We would be denying the cold, hard truth if we say that the United Nations is delivering as it should. On peace and security, its voice is too often drowned by the rivalries of great powers, while some nations simply ignore its resolutions and do as they please. Too often, the UN's blue helmet, once a symbol of moral authority, no longer commands the same respect. From the conflicts in Gaza to Ukraine, to the crisis in Sudan, DRC Congo, Somalia, and the Sahel, we see actors proceed undeterred by the United Nations calls. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Kenya speaks from the experience of a nation deeply invested in multilateralism. For decades, we have placed our troops and police in harm's way for peacekeeping missions across Africa and beyond, from Somalia to Democratic Republic of Congo, from South Sudan to most recently in our neighborhood here in Haiti. Over the past 15 months, we are proud to have led the multinational security support mission in Haiti, not because it has been easy, but because solidarity is the essence of the United Nations. Madam President, the mandate of the MSS mission is coming to an end in a few days. As the lead nation, allow me to briefly share our experiences, the successes and the challenges, as both a cautionary tale and a living lesson about the strengths and weaknesses of the current global security governance architecture. For far too long, the people of Haiti called out to the world. Too often, their pleas were met with silence, hesitation, or half measures. Haiti became a tragic reminder of what happens when the international community looks away, prevaricates, or offers half-hearted support. When Kenya responded to the quest for the Haitian authorities, it was in the belief that we were joining a genuinely multinational effort. We welcomed and fully embraced Resolution 2699, by which the United Nations Security Council authorized the MSS with Kenya as the lead nation. Drawing on our decades of peace support operations, we stepped forward, stepped up, and deployed our officers to confront the rampant menace of gang violence in Port-au-Prince and its environs. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the mission has operated in a volatile environment under enormous constraints. It has been underfunded, under-equipped, and operated below 40% of its authorized personnel strength. Our police officers have valiantly shouldered responsibilities without the full logistical support that would accompany any mission sanctioned by the United Nations. Despite these challenges, and against all odds, the MSS has delivered results many thought were impossible. The presidential palace, once under siege from gangs, is today restored as the seat of government. The police headquarters and the police training center, once overrun by gangs, are now secure, with the academy resuming the training of new police officers, over 700 of whom graduated a few months ago. Schools that have been shattered by violence have reopened, with children back in class, learning and progressing. Roads once manned or blocked by gangs have now free-flowing traffic. Cases of kidnapping and extortion have reduced sharply. The airport and the seaport, once surrounded by gangs, are now abuzz with normal operations. Which begs the question, if so much could be achieved with limited resources and stretched personnel within just 15 months, what more could have been accomplished if the United Nations fraternity had truly acted together in solidarity with the people of Haiti? From this podium, I wish to assure all partners and actors that with the right personnel, adequate resources, appropriate equipment, and necessary logistics, Haiti's security can be restored. Gangs can be neutralized and the safety of streets, schools, hospitals, and homes secured. The continued harassment, abductions, and criminal acts undermining the lives of Haitians are unacceptable, unjustifiable, and must be stopped by this organization, the United Nations. Madam President, as the UN Security Council deliberates on the next steps, we must not lose sight of the fact that the situation in Haiti demands sustained, coordinated, and undivided international attention. A careful and orderly transition from MSS is essential to consolidate the hard-won gains so far achieved. I urge the Security Council and all partners to remain steadfast in ensuring that Haiti moves forward on a path of peace, stability, and renewal. Ladies and gentlemen, on human rights, our principle is clear and unwavering. The protection of civilians and respect for humanitarian law cannot be applied selectively. We cannot condemn suffering in one place and turn a blind eye in another. Kenya is gravely concerned by the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and by the immense suffering of civilians caught in the devastation of disproportionate military operations. At the same time, we call for the unconditional release of Israeli hostages. In line with the African Union and United Nations resolutions, we also call for a permanent ceasefire, for strict adherence to international humanitarian law, and for the launch of a credible political process. Only through such a process can the vision of a two-state solution be realized, where Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace, security, and stability. Kenya is equally deeply troubled by the worsening humanitarian situation in Sudan, where innocent citizens are caught in the crossfire of a needless war. We fully endorse the Quad, comprising Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States, in affirming that there cannot be a military solution and that only political dialogue offers a viable path forward. We join the Quad in urging all parties, including SAF, RSF, and the external actors, to respect Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and firmly reject any attempts to divide the country, reaffirming our unwavering support for a unified Sudan for the benefit of all its people. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Those who look to the future with a clear vision know that climate change is not only the single greatest threat of our age, but also one of the greatest transformation opportunities of our time. The global stocktake has made it plain that the world is off track. Current national determined contributions are steering us towards temperature rises far beyond any safe threshold. This is the difference between survival on one hand and devastation for millions across the world on the other. Kenya and Africa are not passive victims of this crisis. We are taking bold steps showing that climate action is not only possible, but can also be the foundation for inclusive growth. We are building a climate resilient society by embedding adaptation into every sector, from agriculture and energy to infrastructure and livelihoods, to sustainable mining and artificial intelligence. This ambition is visible on the ground. Today, 93% of Kenya's electricity comes from renewable sources: geothermal, wind, solar, and hydro. We are expanding investments in e-mobility, climate-smart agriculture, clean cooking solutions, and green manufacturing. We are also pioneering nature-compatible solutions such as sustainable waste management and circular economy interventions. Africa, too, is uniting its voice. In 2023, in Nairobi, we hosted the inaugural Africa Climate Summit, where the continent adopted the Nairobi Declaration on Climate Action and Call to Action. Just 2 weeks ago, in Addis Ababa, Africa came together once more at the second Africa Climate Summit to reaffirm our commitment and strengthen our ambition for climate-positive growth. We declared Africa not just as a victim of the crisis, but as a source of solutions, with climate action driving economic growth, transformation, and job creation for our communities. Ambition, ladies and gentlemen, cannot stand on willpower alone. Implementing our new NDCs will require $56 billion. That is why we call on the global community to unlock the $300 billion agreed at Baku, and to accelerate negotiations towards the new $1.3 trillion goal under the Baku-Belém roadmap. Without affordable finance and without reform of the international financial architecture, the promise of climate action in Africa will remain constrained. Madam President, in the aftermath of World War II, the Bretton Woods institutions were created to stabilize the global economy and rebuild war-torn Europe. At that time, their design reflected the power and interest of the victorious nations, who were also their primary shareholders and beneficiaries. The IMF was tasked with upholding the gold standard exchange rate system, while the World Bank was established to finance Europe's reconstruction. Both have since evolved into development finance institutions, but their structures, decision-making, and governance remains dominated by wealthy nations. Today, the global context is vastly different. The global standard collapsed 5 decades ago, and Europe has long since been rebuilt. Yet, the governance of these institutions has not kept pace with needs of a multipolar world, especially the needs of poor and developing nations. The mismatch between shareholders and stakeholders has become starkly visible. For instance, during the IMF's recent allocation of special drawing rights, 64% went to wealthy nations. Just imagine, 64%. With little need for liquidity support. They didn't need the money anyway, but they got 64%. While the poorer countries received just 2.4%. What a disconnect. The imbalance highlights how the very institutions meant to safeguard global finance stability often perpetuate inequality and instability. I have argued, and I say it again, that the current global financial architecture punishes poor countries with high interest rates and enormous conditionalities, while rewarding rich nations with lower interest rates and softer lending rates. Its rules, priorities, and allocation mechanisms consistently favor those already prosperous, while trapping vulnerable economies in cycles of debt, high borrowing costs, and inadequate access to emergency support and concessional funding. It is imperative to